I'm Lee Brissetti, Executive Director of Poets House, a national poetry library just steps away in Battery Park City. I want to begin my very brief remarks by thanking Anne and the whole Trinity Wall Street community for their partnership in putting together this event, and the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council for their assistance. And I want to thank all of you in this room and those listening on the web or the radio for your presence in remembrance and reconciliation through poetry. 10 years after September 11th, 2001, we mark the enormity of what happened here in this place to people. We saw, we are implicated. But remembering is what the living do. So in what is said and in silence, we begin by acknowledging the people who were killed and the anguish of their families. Being here, we give each other the gift of our mutual attention, and we create a place for deep listening, a kind of listening that is magnified. I'm sure that all of you who live in New York City remember that soon after the towers fell, poetry was appended to the ad hoc street shrines where family members posted notices of their missing loved ones, both in physical proximity to the site throughout the city and across the World Wide Web. Iconic poems were exchanged almost immediately, among them the W.H. Auden poem that you will hear later. We are gathered today with some of the great poets of our time, some of whom live just a few blocks away. They're going to share some of those iconic poems that were circulated after the towers fell, as well as their own words and poems that respond directly to the events of 9/11. To close, there's going to be a group reading of Galway Canals When the Towers Fell. This poetic voicing is followed tomorrow by a day of quiet reflection at Poets House. We invite all of you to bring a poem of remembrance and reconciliation to be appended to the Poets House walls for visitors to read. Or come to sit in the glorious warm light of the river, in the silence of people thinking. Come to find a poem that speaks personally to you from our library, or to write your own reflections. Poets House is located at 10 River Terrace at Murray Street in Battery Park City. I am very happy to tell you more during the reception. And we are open tomorrow from 11 till 6 and regularly Tuesdays through Saturdays. Finally, I want to thank all of the poets who generously share this afternoon with us. And this is the order in which they are also going to read. And I hope you'll find a program that also marks this occasion. Martha Rhodes, Lawrence Joseph, Cornelius Eady, J. Chester Johnson, Major Jackson, Marie Howe, and Mark Doty. And they're going to introduce themselves as they come up. And I thank you all for being here. I want to acknowledge again the Reverend Canon Anne Maloney, Vicar of Trinity Wall Street, and the whole Trinity community, as well as the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. This event is sponsored in conjunction with their Insight Art and Commemoration Program, which honors the 10-year anniversary of 9/11 by inviting artistic response to a decade of recovery. And again, I want to thank you for coming and creating an atmosphere of attention. And I want to end by quoting the great poet George Oppen, because the known and the unknown touch, we witness. Thank you.
I'm Martha Rhodes. I'll begin with a poem called The Mourner by W.S. Merwin. On the south terraces of the glass palace that has no bells, my hoe clacks in the bean rows in the cool of the morning. At her hour, the mourner approaches on her way to the gate, a small old woman, an aunt in the world without nephews or nieces. Her black straw hat, shining like water, floats back and forth, climbing along the glass walls of the terraces, bearing its purple wax rose. We nod as she passes slowly toward the palace, her soft face with its tiny wattle flushed salmon. I hear her small soles receding and remember the sound of the snow at night brushing the glass towers in the time of the living. While I did not turn to poetry in those first days, if not weeks, it occurred to me as I thought about today's gathering that I turned to poets and to the work of poetry, teaching, and the continued operation of a publishing company I run. My home, my work, and my husband's business especially were all located in the acreage surrounding the towers. Over the next days, weeks, months, it was Michael Klein, Jean Valentine, Melissa Hotchkiss, Laurent Bosselar, Ellen Voigt, Daniel Tobin, Robert Polito, Jax Taylor, Lee Brissetti, and the constant and amazing staff and authors and supporters who I work with that I turned to. What sustained me were the dinners, breakfasts, brunches, teas with poets, the offer of office, telephone, and computer at the New School, of the extended use of homes out of the city that I could not get myself to leave, even for a day. You see, my husband and I were very soon thrown into a financially calamitous situation due to the location of his business in the heart of what became known as the frozen zone. And so 5 terrible years followed, from which we emerged in 2006. Always a poet of doom and gloom, of dislocation, I was faced with the possibility of situations that have been the stuff of my psychic life since girlhood. Homelessness, impoverishment, subterranean depression, crippling isolation, domestic collapse. And the poems I've selected today are less occasional poems than poems that grew out of a playing field flattened. The fear of everything being taken from desk to chair to credit card to even husband. Over time and finally emerges in the work, I've recognized a hint of a way up and out from the terrain of desolation. Immediately then. And now I see a short street, cobblestoned, worn, leading to the terrified river. Current of paper, glass, and ash, please carry me north, away, not across, nor down through the narrows. Carry me to a mountain so that I may hide. Let me disappear, invisible to the helicopters congregating above, invisible to the smell that will cling to my cells for the next 6 months. Take me from my windows that face the park already turned landing field, from my street turned triage center, Red Cross, cell phone, radio, news broadcast station. Let me dig a hole in a mountain and burrow in. Mother above me, dear one, find me now. Pick me up in your green sky cab Buick, your darling, precious girl, and take me away from here. Outskirts by Thomas Transtromer. This is a Robert Bly translation. Men in overalls, the same color as earth, rise from a ditch. It's a transitional place in stalemate, neither country nor city. Construction cranes on the horizon want to take the big leap, but the clocks are against it. Concrete piping scattered around laps at the light with cold tongues. Auto body shops occupy old barns. Stones throw shadows as sharp as objects on the moon surface. And these sites keep on getting bigger, like the land bought with Judas's silver, a potter's field for burying strangers. The land pirates. The land pirates will come to grab my fields, invade my cabinets, smelt my last gold. For hidden cash, they'll tap my walls. No diamond chips, no pearls. Unply the planks, then auction these nails. Everything I own down the hill, everything I own sold to the town. Out I'm put onto the gravel. Out you go, proclaims the gavel. Out I go and away, all because I cannot pay. The gathered. The river sludge hardens and cracks. We pitch our tents in mile-long rows, branches, leaves, fox and deer tracks. A few puddles pool, but there's little flow. We're camped above, too tired to press one more step. We sleep in fits, the gnats, the howlings, the mess of our lives, bright in our eyes, and lit before us are precious disasters. This town's been claimed by the ridiculous, by the should-have-known betters who assign us these lots, who welcome us here as their own. We deserve this rot and roll in it, thrive in it, and in turn, welcome those who follow us. Need a bed? Rest here with us, friend. End of the line, dead end. True hope. That wet canine smell as you enter your new home. Flies suggest, avoid that room down the hall. You're here with all you could bring, your father's prayer shawl in its velvet pouch, the Morris chair, mission desk. You navigate the rippled floors. When lightning rings through the pipes, the kitchen brightens, a flash of true hope. It is golden here for this demisecond, bright. You won't be frightened away. The jade plant. I want to go to the room where the jade plant thrives on the white pine floor. I want to sit next to the plant all day against the white plaster wall. I want the room available all days and evenings. It's just one of the several in my house arranged by me for peaceful times. I want to go to the room now, though it does not exist in my life yet. It is several hundred miles away in a small town cottage by the river. A friend who knows me best might say, I can see you in this house with its contained yard. I sit in the white room often. The plant is old and thick. Its leaves are shiny, deep green. My sister arrives soon from Maine, and I'll give her this room for the week. The jade, actually our mother's, what she last bought the eve she lost all memory of what it is to buy something, to recognize what it is you want, to point to it and say, that should be mine now, and then it is. I want to dedicate this reading of mine to all the people that stood next to me on the street on that morning, to the people in the towers, and I want to thank you all for being here.
I'm Lawrence Joseph. I would like to read 4 poems. Before I begin my reading, I would like to thank Trinity Church for having us, and to thank my fellow poets and for being here. But I think we all feel we are reading poetry on behalf of all the poets in the United States and in the world who responded to what happened 10 years ago. My wife Nancy Van Gotham and I live very close to here. We live in Battery Park City near the corner of South End Avenue and Liberty, which is about a block from what became known as Ground Zero. And we were evacuated from our apartment for 8 weeks or so. And during that time, I remembered a poem that I read when I was young by Zbigniew Herbert, the Polish poet, who wrote this poem about two persons during bombing in Poland in the 1940s. Two drops. No time to grieve for roses when the forests are burning. Julius Slowacki. The forests were on fire. They, however, wreathed their necks with their hands like bouquets of roses. People ran to shelters. He said his wife had hair in whose depths one could hide. Covered by one blanket, they whispered shameless words, the litany of those who love. When it got very bad, they leapt into each other's eyes and shut them firmly. So firmly, they did not feel the flames when they came up to the eyelashes. To the end, they were brave. To the end, they were faithful. To the end, they were similar, like two drops stuck at the edge of a face. The next poem I'm going to read is from my book of poems, Into It. Unyieldingly present. Near the curb beside the police lines, a pool of blood, the gas tanks of the cars in the garage on West Street exploding, an air tank, its out-of-air alarm going off pops and is skidding. That woman staring into space, her dress on fire. What transpires in a second. On an intact floor, a globe of the world bursts like a balloon. A ceiling-mounted exit sign is melting. Facile equivalences are to be avoided. Hell, the horrific, into the routine. Glass and metal can be identified, not the atoms of human ash. I set down thoughts, sequences of images of emotions dissolved in a mass encoded in the brain. The depth or the width of the hatred measured from so high up the time it takes for those who are falling? Is it that reality disjointed cannot be discerned, or that consciousness disjointed cannot discern it? The message I am communicating, this beam of focused energy, no, I said, no, I am not going to allow anything to happen to you. I summon up in my mind a place where my thoughts will find yours. No, nothing is going to happen to you. An issue of language now, isn't it? There are these vicious circles of accumulated causation. Irreal is the word. I know of no defense against those addicted to death. God, my God, I thought it was over. Absolutely had to be. What am I supposed to feel? Images of that, after that, loop in the head. Looming ahead in the smoke, that man at the railing can't breathe. I'm having trouble breathing, he says. You saw it, I saw it. I'm frightened. This is about which states of mind? Solid brown and gray, a muddy mess of debris, of powder. There is a strip of window glazing hanging from what kind of a tree? What isn't separated? What isn't scribbled? What will not be metamorphosed, reduced, occurring, it will be said, unyieldingly fixed, unyieldingly present. and a section of a 10-part poem, also in my last book, my book Into It. This is section 4 of a poem entitled Why Not Say What Happens. Autumn turned to winter, and the sight began to clear. The limits of my language are the limits of my world, said Wittgenstein. The realization, the state of the physical world depends on shifts in the delusional thinking of very small groups. One of Garfinkel's patients tripped over a severed foot while evacuating the stock exchange. Several others saw the first plane pass right next to the almost floor-length windows of their conference room. When I'm not working, the last thing I want to do is talk about it, said one policeman who, like many of the city's uniformed officers, is still working a schedule of 12 hours on, 12 hours off. Shoes, books, wallets, jewelry, watches, some of them still keeping time. The congressman says he can't say for sure there isn't a suitcase with a nuclear bomb floating around out there. Everything immense and out of context. The large item in the mud, one of the motors that powered the tower's elevators. It's intense, says Lieutenant Bovine. No photographs. This is a crime scene. What happened was one floor fell on top of another, as many as 10 floors compressed into a foot of space. What fell was mostly metal. The cement vaporized. The night watch was what the laid-out scene looked like. The fences around the wreckage covered with T-shirts, teddy bears, and memorial banners signed by thousands of visitors. Tourists snap pictures, and subject to the way the wind is blowing, the air is tinged with acrid smoke. Lost, missing family, 1-866-856-4167 or 1-212-741-4626. A web exclusive, the poet will speak about poetry and grief. The smells of burning wiring, dankness from the tunnels, the sharp and sweet cherry-like smell of death. At 8:10 on Friday, 2 more bodies are found in a stairwell of the South Tower. Work again stops, and the iron workers who have been cutting steel beams come out from the hole. The work goes on until well past midnight. More debris is removed, another body recovered. A group of iron workers stands on a narrowed beam, one end of which juts over the pit like a gangplank. 3 35mm movie cameras are placed on top of nearby buildings, each programmed to take a picture every 5 minutes, day and night. A bugler slips onto the site and plays taps. And the final poem I'd like to read is a recent poem. It's in the Granta magazine's 10 Years Later issue. So where are we? So where were we? The fiery avalanche headed right at us, falling, flailing bodies in midair, the neighborhood under thick gray powder on every screen. I don't know where you are. I don't know what I'm going to do, I heard a man say. The man who had spoken was myself. What year? Which Southwest Asian war? Smoke from infants' brains on fire from the phosphorus hours after they're killed. Killers reveling in the horror. The more obscene, the better it works. The point at which 100,000 massacred is only a detail. Asset and credit bubbles about to burst. Too much consciousness of too much at once, a tangle of tenses and parallel thoughts, a series of feelings overlapping a sudden sensation felt and known, those chains of small facts repeated endlessly in the depths of silent time. So where are we? My ear turns like an animal's. I listen. Like it or not, a digital you is out there. Half of that city's buildings aren't there. Who was there when something was, and a witness to it? The rich boy general conducts the Pakistani heroin trade on a satellite phone from his cave. On the top floor of the Federal Reserve, and an office looking out onto Liberty, at the South Tower's one-time space, the Secretary of the Treasury concedes they got killed in terms of perceptions. 10 blocks away is the Church of the Transfiguration. In the back is a Byzantine Madonna. There is a God who fits the drama in a very particular sense. What you said, the memory of a remembered memory, the color of a memory, violet and black, the lunar eclipse on the winter solstice, the moon, a red and black and copper hue, the streets, the harbor, the light, the sky, the blue and cloudless, intense and blue morning sky. Thank you.
I'm Cornelius Eady. I'm going to begin by reading an introduction I wrote in February 2002 for the magazine Plowshares, which I was guest editing at the time. Also at the time, I was working on a play here in downtown Manhattan at the Vineyard Theater. And I'm reading it because it is about 9/11, the aftermath of it, or being in the middle of it, I should say. But it also includes the poet whose poem I'd like to begin with, whose name is Meg Carney. Postcard from New York, February 2002. It's a different city now, this New York, this city my wife and I love and choose to live in. A new shorthand can be heard for time and location. The event, the 11th, the pile. For weeks after, on the way to rehearsals for a play of mine that was going up, I would watch people slow down and gaze into the display window at the job lot on the corner of 14th Street and University Place. There was a gas mask at discount. I wondered what they were imagining. The shape of the toxic cloud, the half second of calm before your nose tells you this scent isn't normal, everyday New York City funk. What were they supposing? And I wondered, and still think from time to time, what might have happened to the guy in the first tower whose jets hit, who called up the local ABC station from his cell phone. He was up somewhere above the 100th floor, above that horrible smoking wound on the building. Everyone was fine. He wanted the rest of the city to know. Then a few minutes later, the second plane hit the other tower, the one with all the broadcast antennas, and he was mute, and the rest of the city, without cable or police radio band, blind and deaf. We rarely think of our lives as historical, yet suddenly history was sifting down. On the leaves of the ginkgos, on the roofs and hoods of our cars, into our startled noses, impossible to block out. It was all we could talk about. At the theater, on the bare stage, morning rehearsals would begin with a long talk about what this all meant, what was going to mean. It was hard to pretend, I thought, when you're surrounded by what you couldn't imagine. We all had theories we didn't know. Like everyone else, we were scared and impatient for what would come next. We were waiting for the new normal, to show signs of appearing, if ever. And within the context of the larger tragedy, death kept up his other appointments. In my hometown of Rochester, New York, as the towers burned and fell, the second life of one of the dearest people in my life was slowly turning into a widow, as she and her stepchildren and extended family drifted in the currents between the live television feed in New York and her husband's deathbed. That weekend, as we drove north on the West Side Highway, on the way upstate to the memorial service, how normal the rest of the city looked until we pulled upon the George Washington Bridge and looked back south to that gray smudge that used to catch the light. A few weeks later, I'm on the roof of the poet May Carney's apartment with another friend, Esther Brummer. We're on the Lower East Side, and looking south at night, there are two white pillars, Klieg lights, for the rescue workers and construction crews, burning into the sky where the towers once stood. This is after weeks of hoaxes, scares, alerts. Pox envelopes are winging their way through the postal system. We have seen the impossible, a fire that has burned for weeks and will continue for months. A mayor whose tough love attitude was about to assure that his exit from office would be as anonymous as possible, now forgiven, rehabilitated into being the right man at the right moment. It's a beautifully clear night in any other direction but south. As I look toward the site, I think, as I have often these days, of a snippet of a song by Paul Simon. Anger, and no one can heal it, slides through the metal detector. Meg, whose office window view points straight to the site, something I used to envy a little, is reading aloud a new poem, one of the first I've heard on this topic that makes sense, called View of Downtown Manhattan from My Bedroom, which he wrote the day after the 11th. The amputee insists her legs are still down there. She feels them burning. She knows when the smoke clears, they will be standing. She's right, I think, and tell her. That's what it feels like. There it isn't, my wife once said as we both looked down 7th Avenue one Sunday afternoon, fooled again by what we weren't seeing. And then the three of us gazed out across the city, listening to the distant roar of traffic and airplanes, waiting for that other shoe to drop. Most of the writers haven't submitted their work before last fall, so you won't find anything here that addresses the World Trade Center, but you will find, I hope, in the stories and poems gathered, true human commerce, the witnessing of what has and will hopefully continue to go on between us. New York and America might be a different place, but if we're very lucky, this scary moment, with all its grief and contradictions, is being scribbled down right now by someone into our unofficial record, which happily happened. I couldn't write about 9/11 for a while. I was teaching at City College, and one day I was sort of instructed, actually. It was the first anniversary of 9/11. I was instructed, since I was the poet there, in residence there, to write something for a memorial. And this is the first poem I actually felt I could finish about 9/11. Grief Bird. After those buildings fell, and New York City stank from bad intent, and the wind twirled with human pigment, and the sky darkened in one spot and howled, there we walked, newborn, holding flashlights and shovels, dusty with shock. The streets painted mad, ears still smarting from the evil crumble. Now the combing, the sifting, now the hauling, the uncovering, the astonished song. I've read at at St. Paul's Church. St. Paul has this wonderful program called Bach at One, and they have a program where basically they're playing Bach, and in between the movements, they will have poets come in and read poetry. And I was invited to do this for Memorial Day, for the Memorial Day weekend, and I came and read, and I was about to read when the poetry director pulled me aside a little and instructed me, listen, don't bum out the musicians. And what he meant by that, and I thought, what he meant was that these musicians, every time the poets coming to St. Paul's Church has the understanding, of course, your impulse is to throw your words upon all the other words that have been talked about, grief and mourning. But for the musicians, they've heard it all, right? They're sitting there, poet after poet, going grief, 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 and you know. So, don't bum out the musicians. And I'm going to quote some lines from Bach's Ascension Oratorio. Ah, behold how hot tears roll down pale cheeks. At St. Paul's Church, the musicians have heard it all. For years they have paused between Bach movements to hear the strange reed of a human voice recite grief. Watch out, the poetry director gently warns me. This church across from the street where the towers fell is busy with spring. What shall I wring from my throat? Won't the tenor later sing? Ah, just stay, my dearest life. What has been whispered, wailed before my arrival? Gone, I figure, worse than gone. When the towers fell, before the towers fell, the lives trapped between the flames and the window, your farewell and your early departure. And I'm going to read one poem, two poems, I should say, that are post 9/11, because we did move on. Migration. When we tell a friend in New York that we've bought a weekend place, she thinks, then tells us how everyone is doing this now, after the fall of the towers. And I think in self-defense, but don't say, how the towers went down on a picture-perfect workday morning, after which all the roads, benches, and tunnels were shut down. So much for second mortgages, baby, if that happens again. I don't say this because I know she means the option to be somewhere else, because I know she means the dice and how we get to roll it. Unlike my parents, who headed north for jobs, for houses simply because indifference was better than never. Unlike my sister and my niece, each in their gray, sometimes bullet-pocked, subsidized apartment blocks. Unlike my old neighborhood, a maze of trying you're not supposed to wiggle out of. I hold my tongue because we've just told our friend we've bought a house that doesn't need to be, and luck is so unfair, complicated, true. And I'm going to end with a poem that is actually, by accident, turned into an elegy for another poet. The poet is Sekou Sandiata. It's a 9/11 poem. And if people who don't know Sekou, track him down. He was a brilliant human being, poet, and musician. He left a lot behind to celebrate. And he didn't die in 9/11, died a few years later. But after his death, I suddenly realized why I put him in the poem, in this particular poem. Communion. After the fall of the towers, it's hard to leave our apartments, pull our eyes from the television, stuck on instant replay. So many angles, so many lenses, all this work and effort just to be told they're gone. Again, then again. How to deal with this invitation, now seemingly from another planet, to come and read poetry at a downtown bar. For the first time in my life, poetry feels a bit foolish. The thought of a grown man reading verse aloud, a half-mile from a mass graveyard, the wreck of things too numerous to list, a shamble so loud it still rattles in our astonished brain pans, even after all these weeks. And I hear my parents' early doubts. What sort of work is this? The words that say, I love jazz, my singing about mice, the things I overhear, then slot into stanzas. After saying no to one or two of these, maybe it's the memory of my dead dad, getting up, rolling out. Can't recall a sick day on the job that plops me in the cab, his soft, wordy boy. Maybe I'm only doing what the sun-burnt grass on our lawn upstate does. What doesn't die off soon curls slowly towards the light and air, tender, relentless. Maybe I need what the small crowd that gathers here needs, the boom of Sekou Santiada's voice, though the sirens remind us, and the streets are spare and ghostlit, and we still don't know how to put it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Chester Johnson. At the thought of 9/11, a range of common and palpable feelings will normally collect: loss, love, remembrance, grief, reconciliation. But 9/11 is also personal. In the morning, my wife Frida and I sat in our offices with an especially close view of the towers, only a couple of hundred yards from the points of contact. For the next several hours, we remained trapped until mid-afternoon. Frida watched the second plane plow into the South Tower. My first poem, Fear of Flying, catches a moment. We're downtown on September the 11th, minding our business, tending fate. There's one moment, early in advance of the rest, when birds don't sing being in flight, when they wind alongside many a parched cornice. No, they never sing without a grip. And we want to be with God. Around the corner, across from St. Paul's Chapel, people take on air. Some leap, while most degrade into vapor in one giant cough, dropping headlong through flames or debris, never landing. God, save them and us. Wait, we had aerate effect to lighten the torque. Balloons, yes, balloons, and footballs, kites, all fly so high a loose languor, as if ordained aloft in undiminishable space, retiring into well-stretched and elevated hands. God meant for rare things to happen, but not for a man with a butcher knife to cut an airborne tether. By hell's unchoked wretch, a gas-blackened plume heatedly swells a swatch of cellophane heavenward, higher still. How does it happen some things rise air-tucked without ties, staves, or other fast catch-me's? Atop an attenuating breath, the swath should land, but when? Wisdom comes once we've taken place. So there, flying is good for business, we're told, but is it good for us? The next, though not a poem about 9/11, nonetheless, still a verse on loss, which in this case proved to be obviated over a few short years. Indeed, my son is here today. Elegy to a Distant Son follows the terza rima form. You will not know by any telling, son, the thoughts that I have softly shared with you. At once you weren't there, from divorce they run, and separate by place and unlike view, we cracked apart as though we were the rot. Myself, for us, was said to be untrue. You have your toys, mild talcums and low spot now at the ductile age of 24, and I have mine, now long in tooth and squat. We share a little only, nothing more, while even on our way to fluent ground. What's done, these coupled traits we're to ignore. You trekked into another side around, another side of scrubs and pits unbound. We should forage by two to bear us best, but you have gods among brambles and trees, the gods you chose without my watchful test. Around the deeper bushes, I, by degrees, have learned to practice distance to survive. We quicken sports news spun as similes, with pitchers, catchers, scores, as points alive and hugs, for father-son things were denied, from which a verbal coven could derive. And now from here, just simply put aside, for you'll do yours and I will go to mine, yet deep within the sleep of foster tide, and maybe on a day of law or sign, you will discover something we define. And maybe at the birth of any child, or moments moiling through the smoke of loss, or left behind, a pair of fools self-styled will shed from us this tumid albatross, before again it madly perseveres. What makes our mutual blood a double cross? And if the promise welcome back appears, we'd squinch badly for lines so meant to save, a flutter to both tongue and vow adheres, to doubt reprised in restive words but brave. A safe distance opens a safe landscape. While musing on the slights that we forgave, I stalk your many secrets I'd reshape, and you're just moving faster to escape. A third piece reflects the decision for each of us to read a poem that directly or indirectly relates to 9/11, but that was actually written by another poet. In this case, W.H. Auden and his poem, September the 1st, 1939. At dawn on that day, Germans hurtling over the Polish borders commenced the blitzkrieg of Poland and thereby launched World War II. This Auden poem not only captured the event for New York City, where he was living at the time, and his generation, but also captured in an eerily similar way the mood of 9/11. To wit, this poem created considerable email traffic during the immediate aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. I sit in one of the dives on 52nd Street, uncertain and afraid as the clever hopes expire of a low, dishonest decade. Waves of anger and fear circulate over the bright and darkened lands of the earth, obsessing our private lives. The unmentionable odor of death offends the September night. Accurate scholarship can unearth the whole offense from Luther until now that has driven a culture mad. Find what occurred at Lentz, what huge imago made a psychopathic God. I and the public know what all school children learn. Those to whom evil is done do evil in return. Exile Thucydides knew all that a speech can say about democracy and what dictators do, the elderly rubbish they talk to an apathetic grave. Analyzed all in his book, The Enlightenment Driven Away, the habit-forming pain, mismanagement, and grief. We must suffer them all again. The windiest militant trash, important person shout is not so crude as our wish. What Mad Nijinsky wrote about Diaghilev is true of the normal heart. For the era bred in the bone of each man and each woman and each man craves what it cannot have. Not universal love, but to be loved alone. All I have is a voice to undo the folded lie, the romantic lie in the brain of the sensual man in the street, and the lie of authority whose buildings grope the sky. There is no such thing as the state, and no one exists alone. Hunger allows no choice to the citizen or the police. We must love one another or die. Defenseless under the night, our world in stupor lies. Yet dotted everywhere, ironic points of light flash out wherever the just exchange their messages. May I, composed like them of eros and of dust, beleaguered by the same negation and despair, show an affirming flame. The following poem, my last today, St. Paul's Chapel, first became the memento card at the chapel soon after it reopened to the general public on September the 11th, 2002. I volunteered at times in the chapel when it had served as the relief center for the recovery workers during the 9 months of cleanup at Ground Zero, from September to May. St. Paul's Chapel. It stood, not a window broken, not a stone dislodged. It stood when nothing else did. It stood when terrorists brought September down. It stood among myths. It stood among ruins. To stand was its purpose. Long lines prove that. It stands, and around it now a shrine of letters, poems, acrostics, litter of the heart. It is the standing people want to grieve, serve, and tend, celebrate the lasting stone of St. Paul's Chapel. And deep into its thick breath, the largest banner fittingly from Oklahoma climbs heavenward, with hands as stars, hands as stripes, hands as a flag, and a rescuer reaches for a stuffed toy to collect a touch, and George Washington's pew doesn't go unused. Charity fills a hole or two. It stood in place of other sorts. It stood when nothing else could. The great had fallen as the brute hardware came down. It stood. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Major Jackson. You are almost invisible in all this plain decay. You are almost invisible in all this plain decay. Children's laughter echoing in arcs of hydrant water spray knots the heart. Those black bathers like Cézanne's will soon petrify to silence. A chorus of power lines hums a melancholic hymn, tenements aching Pyrrhics, doorways and row homes crumbling to gutted relics. This one exposing a nude staircase, that one a second-floor ceiling, Where swings a light bulb like your chipped soul suspended from a thread of nerves? You have never imagined a paradise, nor made a paradise of your ghetto, only suffered the casket a vessel for the human shadow, only longed, wishing for other stones to worship. The sun dreams the crowns of trees behind skyscrapers. Here, the heart is its own light. A pigeon's gurgle sings the earth. The eyes of the dead are like muraled Polaroids, street corner billboards, whose message reads, prosperous gardens, aching humans. This is one of those iconic poems that was passed around during that period 10 years ago. Try to Praise the Mutilated World by Adam Zagajewski. Try to praise the mutilated world. Remember June's long days and wild strawberries, drops of wine, the dew. The nettles that methodically overgrow the abandoned homesteads of exiles. You must praise the mutilated world. You watch the stylish yaks and chips. One of them had a long trip ahead of it, while salty oblivion awaited others. You've seen the refugees heading nowhere. You've heard the executioners sing joyfully. You should praise the mutilated world. Remember the moments when we were together in a white room and the curtain fluttered. Return in thought to the concert where music flared. You gathered acorns in the park in autumn and leaves eddied over the earth's scars. Praise the mutilated world and the gray feather a thrush lost and the gentle light that strays and vanishes and returns. Mathuna, what were we reaching for? Pouring the storm of our days, those first few hours, into each other's mouths, and what sadnesses were we abandoning? What wars were we marching against? And just how many hearts, you asked, were stolen, and how many rightfully ours? How did I come to imagine building a city of flower boxes, or hear our people whispering in between the plantings? And then, when in the next few hours did we cease? Roots by Lucille Clifton. Call it our craziness even, call it anything. It is the life thing in us that will not let us die. Even in death's hand, we fold the fingers up and call them greens and grow on them. We hum them and make music. Call it our wildness then. We are lost from the field of flowers. We become a field of flowers. Call it our craziness, our wildness. Call it our roots. It is the light in us. It is the light of us. It is the light. Call it whatever you have to. Call it anything. Lastly, this is Before Us by W.S. Merwin. You were there all the time, and I saw only the days, the air, the nights, the moon changing, cars passing, and faces at the windows, the rain, the leaves, the years, words on pages telling of something else, wind in a mirror. Everything begins so late, after all, when the solitaires have already gone and the doves of Tana, when the laughing owls have long been followed by question marks, and honey creepers and the brown bears of Atlas, the white wolf and the silmy cannot be seen by anyone living. We wake so late, after many dreams it is clear, when the lake is vanished, the shepherds have left their shearlings, grandparents have dissolved with their memories, dictionaries are full of graves. Most of the rivers are lethal. We thought we were younger, for all those ages of knowing nothing, and there you are, at last, after such fallings away and voyages beside me in the dawning room. We wake together in the world of here and its due. You are here and the morning is whole. Finally, the light is young. Because it is here, it is not like anything. How could it have taken you so long to appear, bloom of air, tenderness of leaves? Where were you when the lies were voting, and the fingers believed faces on money? Where were we when the smoke washed us, and the hours cracked as they rang? Where was I when we passed each other on the same streets and traveled by the same pains to the same stations? Now we have only the age that is left to be together, the brief air, the vanishing green, order in office, tourists on the headland, the last hours of the sea. Now we have only the words we remember to say to each other, only the morning of your eyes and the day of our faces to be together, only the time of our hands with its vexed motor, and the note of the thrush on the guava branch in the shiny rain for the rest of our lives. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Marie Howe. Can you all hear me back there? Can you hear? No? It feels echoey up here. Is it better now? Better? I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be in this place with you all. Thank you for being here. I'm very glad that Donna Massini is sitting next to my daughter because she put earphones in her ears. And can you hear me, Inan? Do you have earphones in? Put them back in. Because I was having a panic attack over there as these gorgeous poems were being read, still like frightened that she was hearing details. So much has happened in the last 10 years. So many people have lived and so many people have died. And here we are at this moment together. It's always a miracle to feel that. I'd like to read a poem by the great poet Martina Spada called Alabanza, in praise of Local 100. For the 43 members of hotel employees and restaurant employees, Local 100, working at the Windows of the World restaurant, who lost their lives in the attack at the World Trade Center. Alabanza. Alabanza, praise the cook with a shaven head and a tattoo on his shoulder that said, Oye, a blue-eyed Puerto Rican with people from Fajardo, the harbor of pirates centuries ago. Praise the lighthouse in Fajardo, candle glimmering white to worship the dark saint of the sea. Alabanza, praise the cook's yellow pirate's cap, worn in the name of Roberto Clemente, his plane that flamed into the ocean loaded with cans for Nicaragua, for all the mouths chewing the ash of earthquakes. Alabanza, praise the kitchen radio, dial clicked even before the dial on the oven, so that music in Spanish rose before bread. Praise the bread, Alabanza. Praise Manhattan from 107 flights up, like Atlantis, glimpsed through the windows of an ancient aquarium. Praise the great windows where immigrants from the kitchen could squint and almost see their world, hear the chant of nations, Ecuador, Mexico, República Dominicana, Haiti, Yemen, Ghana, Bangladesh, Alabanza. Praise the kitchen in the morning where the gas burned blue on every stove and exhaust fans fired their diminutive propellers. Hands cracked eggs with quick thumbs or sliced open cartons to build an altar of cans. Alabanza. Praise the busboy's music, the chime of his dishes and silverware in the tub. Alabanza. Praise the dish dog, the dishwasher who worked that morning because another dishwasher could not stop coughing or because he needed overtime to pile the sacks of rice and beans for a family floating away on some Caribbean island plagued by frogs. Alabanza. Praise the waitress who heard the radio in the kitchen and sang to herself about a man gone. Alabanza. After the thunder, wilder than thunder, after the shudder deep in the glass of the great windows, after the radio stopped singing like a tree full of terrified frogs, after night burst the dam of day and flooded the kitchen, for a time, the stoves glowed in darkness, like the lighthouse in Ferrado, like a cook's soul. Soul, I say, even if the dead cannot tell us about the bristles of God's beard, because God has no face. Soul, I say, to name the smoke beams flung in constellations across the night sky of this city and cities to come. Alabanza, I say, even if God has no face. Alabanza, when the war began, from Manhattan and Kabul, two constellations of smoke rose and drifted to each other. Teach me to dance. We have no music here. And the other said, with a Spanish tongue, I will teach you. Music is all we have. Alabanza. Martina Spada. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful poem of praise. I found a poem because, of course, we can't help but think of the people in Afghanistan and the people in Iraq who have died as well because of this day. I found a poet whose name I did not know. His name is, I'll probably mispronounce it, Parta Nadiri. He lived in Afghanistan. He lives in Afghanistan. He was imprisoned by the Soviet-backed regime for 3 years in the 1970s after he began to write poetry. He's now widely regarded as one of the leading modernist poets in Afghanistan. And after years in exile, he's recently returned to live in Kabul, where he is the president of Afghan Pen Association. This is a poem called Lucky Man, and it was written in 2002 from Afghanistan. Excuse me. When your star is unseen in this desolate sky, your despair itself becomes a star. My twin, the steadfast sun, and I both grasp its far-flung brilliance. In a land where water is locked up in the very depths of desiccated rocks, the trees are ashamed of their wizened fruits. The honest orchard is laid waste. Such a bloodied carpet is spread before the future. Yesterday, leaning on my cane, I returned from the tree's cremation. Today, I search the ashes for my lost, homeless phoenix. Perhaps it was you who shadowed me. Perhaps it was only my shadow. Even though the lucky men in my land lack stars in the heavens, lack shadows on the earth, they welcome any stars that grace their devastated sky. Oh, my friend, my only friend, turn your anguish into constellations. Last night, after dinner, my daughter said, "Let's pretend we have a blackout." And I said, okay. So we turned off all the lights, and we lit candles while she ate some beefaroni. And after that, we blew out the candles, and we were walking through our very small New York apartment, and I stumbled over something, and I said, how, I can't see where I'm going. And she said, use your sixth sense. And I said, what is my sixth sense? And she said, memory. So I was thinking about how memory, of course, tells us that the dead are not dead, and that we're all alive at the same time. There's a little poem called My Dead Friends. It was not written after September 11th, but was written after the major ravages of the AIDS pandemic hit this country. My dead friends, who I speak to all the time. I have begun, when I'm weary and can't decide an answer to a bewildering question, to ask my dead friends for their opinion. And the answer is often immediate and clear. Should I take the job? Move to the city? Should I try to adopt a child in my late middle age? They stand in unison, shaking their heads and smiling. Whatever leads to joy, they always answer, to more life and less worry. I look into the vase where Billy's ashes were. It's green in there, a green vase. And I ask Billy if I should return the difficult phone call. And he says, yes. Billy's already gone through the frightening door. Whatever he says to do, I'll do. Thank you. And now I want to just finish with 3 very short poems by children. I was thinking that maybe the 7th sense is our imagination. And this, of course, is what we must begin to use now. We must begin to use it as if we had the bravery and courage of children. I am weary of all of us being told that we are naive to imagine a different future, that it's foolish and unsophisticated to imagine that anything could ever change. I feel as if the children are the people who teach us. They pretend every day they know there is very little difference between what we call true and what we call pretend. And so I want to finish by reading these poems that all of them came from the miraculous classes a poet named John Rybicki teaches. If you don't know John Rybicki, find him. He's an astonishing poet, and he goes into rooms. He works with children who have been traumatized. And grace comes out of these children. Here's a poem by a girl named Ilana from the 4th grade. He asked them to think of the kind of machine they could have if they could invent any kind of machine. Here's what Alana wrote. I want a machine that would take me back in time and create the story that tells how my shadow went back to ring the bells of peace in the first person's ear. I want a machine that would take me back in time and create the story that tells how my shadow went back to ring the bells of peace in the first person's ear. Here's a poem by a third grader. This is my favorite poem. Here's what, very short. I saw a gun, and I put a bird in the gun, and I pulled the trigger, and an egg came out. I saw a gun, and I put a bird in the gun, and I pulled the trigger, and an egg came out. And finally, here's a poem by a boy named Cameron Penny. He wrote this in 2001, before the events of September 11th. I was in Houston, Texas, the morning of September 11th. I was teaching, actually, for Mark Doty, and my friend Donna had called me early in the morning because we were both going to wake up and write that morning. And she called me, and I said, okay, let's start. And we both sat down at our desks, she in New York and I in Houston. And 10 minutes later, she called me back and said, pull that TV out of your closet. You've got to turn on the TV. And then, of course, we watched, with the phone in my hand, we watched TV together, and Donna was on the street by then for hours. I was leaving the next day to go meet my class, and Tony Hoagland called me, another wonderful poet, and I said, I gotta go. He said, before you go, I just have a 6-line poem to tell you by this kid, 4th grade kid, Cameron Penny. Listen to this. I'm like, okay, what? And he said this to me over the phone. If you are lucky in this life, a window will appear on a battlefield between 2 armies. When the soldiers look into the window, they don't see their enemies. They see themselves as children, and they stop fighting and go home and go to sleep. When they wake up, the land is well again. Thank you.
It's good to stand in this company and in this company. I remember, there is so little that we can do as the living here in the face of the dead, the great dead that we carry with us. Poetry is always trying to reach towards the unsayable, to bring more and more of what we can't find words for into the realm of words. But poetry's work is also sometimes to say the most direct and clear things. And I think on this occasion of the ending of Marie's great poem, What the Living Do, which ends, I am living, I remember you. As clear, as plain, as true as words can get. And here we are doing that together. We are living, we remember you. I want to begin with a little poem by the great Greco-Egyptian poet Constantine Cavafy, who thinks in this poem about what it is to bring the world outside into ourselves, to internalize the landscapes of memory. This is a translation by Edmund Keeley and Philip Sherrard, and the poem is called In the Same Space. The setting of houses, cafes, the neighborhood that I've seen and walked through years on end. I created you while I was happy, while I was sad, with so many incidents, so many details, and for me, the whole of you has been transformed into feeling. That goes by very quickly, so here it is again. In the same space. The setting of houses, cafes, the neighborhood that I've seen and walked through years on end. I created you while I was happy, while I was sad, with so many incidents, so many details. And for me, the whole of you has been transformed into feeling. Well, I never thought that the Twin Towers were buildings that could be transformed into feeling in their brusqueness, their plainness, their assertion of power. This little poem of mine remembers them in another aspect. It's also called In the Same Space. The sun set early in the square, winter afternoons, angling over the apartments to the west, so that light would bisect the northern row of dark houses diagonally, the grand houses that were suddenly not of the last century, but of the century before. Then the world would seem equally divided a while between the golden and the chill, equipoise in a bitter year. When the sun was completely gone, we'd turn for home, the dogs and I, and to the south, the two towers, harshly formal by day, brusque in their authority. At the beginning of evening, they'd go a blue a little darker than the sky, lit from top to bottom by a wavering curtain of small, welcoming lamps. Like Cornelius, I could not write about the events of 9/11. I could barely make a sentence about them until a year later, the anniversary day, which I remember as a strange, windy, edgy day. This poem began. It's in little sections. I'll just pause between them. It's called In Their Flight. Who believes in them? It doesn't matter much to the souls, newly set free, wheeling in the air over the site of their last engagements. Suppose we could see them. They'd be like sparrows. No, like, they'd be birds. One of those autumn flocks when the solitaries gather in great numbers over the waste places and the remaining fields, turning in the air as if together they made a huge piece of cloth folding in on itself, or a mathematical diagram of folding. No hurry, nothing obscuring the air for them, vast sky entirely light-washed as they assemble into a great progression of pattern. In community, at last, we want to proceed in our flock, our troop, incorporated into a radiant vitality without ceasing. You want more than that? Of course you do. You want the steady mosquito drone to go on and on ceaselessly. You want to be the one who gets to do the perceiving forever. Of course you do. But here's my guess. It's another thing for the dead. They've been singular long enough. We can't let ourselves see what enormous work it is to be one of something, to exert the will to sustain those boundaries. The dead, rimless, loosed from particularity, move out toward the edge of the city, someplace the flock can unknot itself freely, where they can feast in the fields, oblivious to the column of smoke roiling behind them. Anniversary day, evil wind banging the door to the gym till the glass shattered. And Mauricio said in a low voice, as if to say it would somehow protect him, lots of spirits blowing around today. This is a poem by the great Polish poet Wisława Szymborska. It's called Photograph from September 11th, and this is translated by Claire Kavanaugh and Stanislav Baranczak. Photograph from September 11th. They jumped from the burning floors. 1, 2, a few more, higher, lower. The photograph halted them in life and now keeps them above the earth, toward the earth. Each is still complete with a particular face and blood well hidden. There's enough time for hair to come loose, for keys and coins to fall from pockets. They're still within the air's reach, within the compass of places that have just now opened. I can do only 2 things for them: describe this flight and not add a last line.
Before introducing the final poem we'll read today, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you, the audience, for being here and for supporting this extraordinary event through your attendance. Please do stay for the reception, which will be held outside. It will be held just north of the entrance to the church, again, outside. We'll have some goodies and plenty of wonderful conversation. We'd love to spend some time with you. Several decades ago, I became fascinated, as so many young poets do, with the ways in which well-established poets desire their poems to be read, as reflected in audio collections. So I acquired an old collection, which I still have, with readings by Yeats, Sitwell, Auden, Plath, Stein, Dylan Thomas. Well, you get the picture. Interestingly enough, also included in that older collection was a poem read by a young whippersnapper by the name of Galway Connell. He is no longer a whippersnapper, of course, but one of the most revered and respected poets of our time. So, without surprise, once his poem, When the Towers Fell, appeared in the New Yorker a year following 9/11, I concluded that this poem is the poem to which poets, critics, and the public will return in the future to understand, in the poem's own special way, that moment. To augment both the substance and style of the piece, Connell employed poets whose lines he could incorporate into When the Towers Fell to lend beauty, natural reason, and greater context. Those poets he chose were Francois Villon, Paul Celan, Walt Whitman, Alexander Watt, and Hart Crane. If you're not familiar with the poem, or if it has been some time since you last heard the verse, it will be a treat. I will read the first 2 stanzas. Each of the poets will read portions of When the Towers Fell. Okay, great. Sorry. From our high window, we saw them in their bands and blocks of light, brightening across a fading sunset. Saw them in the dark hours, glittering as if spirits inside them sat up, calculating profit and loss all night. Saw their tops steeped in the first yellow of sunrise, grew so used to them often we didn't see them. And now, not seeing them, we see them. The banker is talking to London. Umberto is delivering breakfast sandwiches. The trader is working the phone. The mail sorter starts sorting the mail. The secretary arrives, the chef, the gopher, the CEO. Prouvre Irish, sage fol, presta ele, noble vilain, large et chiche, petit et grand, et beau et laid.
The plane screamed low down lower Fifth Avenue, lifted at the arch. Someone said shaking the dog walkers in Washington Square, drove for the North Tower, struck with a heavy thud and a huge bright gush of black and orange fire, and vanished, leaving behind a hole the size and shape a cartoon plane might make, passing through and flying away on the far side, back into the realm of the imaginary. Some with torn clothing, some bloodied, some limping at top speed like children in a three-legged race, some half-dragged, some intact in neat suits and dresses, many dusted to a ghostly whiteness with eyes rubbed red as the eyes of a Zauerhorf, who can see the dead under the ground. They swarm in silence up the avenues.
Some died while calling home to say they were okay. Some called the telephone operators and were told to stay put. Some died after over an hour spent learning they would die. Some died so abruptly they may have seen death from inside it. Some burned, their faces caught fire. Some were asphyxiated. Some broke windows and leaned into the sunny day. Some were pushed out from behind by others in flame. Some let themselves fall, begging gravity to speed them to the ground. Some leapt hand in hand, that their fall down the sky might happen more lightly. At the high window where I've often stood to think, or to elude a nightmare, I meet the single, unblinking, electric glare lighting the all-night lifting and sifting for bodies, pieces of bodies, a thumb, a tooth, anything that is not nothing.
She stands on a corner, holding his picture. He is smiling. In the heavy smoke, few pass. Sorry, sorry, sorry. She's startled. Suppose across the street, that headlong stride, or there, that man with hair so black it's purple. And yet, suppose some evening I forgot the face and transfer, yet got by that way without recall, lost, yet poised in traffic. Then I might find your eyes. Sorry, sorry, good luck, thank you. On this side, it is amnesia, or forgetting the way home. On the other, invisibleness, or never entirely returning. Hard to see past the metallic mist, or through the canopy of supposed reality cast over our world, born that no creature ever born can pry its way back through, that no love can tear. All day the towers burn and fall, and burn and fall. In a shot from New Jersey, they seem like smokestacks, spewing Earth's oily remnants. Schwarze Milke de Früh, wir trinken sie abends, wir trinken sie mittags und morgens, wir trinken sie Nacht, wir trinken und trinken.
They come before us now, not as a likeness, but as a corollary, a small instance in the immense lineage of the 20th century's history of violent death. Black men in the South castrated and strung up from trees, soldiers advancing through mud at 90,000 dead per mile, train upon train of boxcars heading eastward, shoved full to the corners with Jews and Roma to be enslaved or gassed, state murder of 20, 30, 40 million of its own, state starvation of 100 million farmers, atomic blasts erasing cities off the earth, fire bombings, the same, death marches, assassinations, disappearances, entire countries become rubble, minefields, mass graves. Wir schaffen ein Grab in den Luften, da liegt man nicht eng. Burst jet fuel, incinerated aluminum, steel fume, crushed marble, exploded granite, pulverized drywall, mashed concrete, berserked plastic, crazed chemicals, scoria, rotting flesh, vapor of the vaporized, draped over our island up to streets regimented into numerals and letters, breathed across the great bridges to Brooklyn and the waiting sea, astringent, miasmic, emphyromatic, sticky air, too foul to take in, but we take it in, too gruesome for seekers of lost beloveds to breathe, but they breathe it, and you breathe it.
The man doesn't look up. Her photograph hangs from his neck. He stares at the sidewalk of flagstones laid down in Whitman's century, curbside edges rounded by the rasps of wheels of iron and steel, the human brain envying the stones. Nistaje zi, za, niknalto, mislajem, jebrijueji sobi, vijteko kostaji zi. I thought again of those on the high floors who knew they would burn alive and then burned alive, as if there were mechanisms of death so mutilating to existence no one gets over them, not even the dead.
I sat down by the waters of the Hudson and saw in steel letters welded to the railing posts Whitman's words written when America was plunging into war with itself. City of the world, proud and passionate city, meddlesome, mad, extravagant city. But when the war was over and Lincoln dead and the dead buried, Whitman remembered, I saw battle corpses, myriads of them, and the white skeletons of young men. I saw them. I saw the debris and debris of all the slain soldiers of the wars. But I saw they were not as was thought. They themselves were fully at rest. They suffered not. The living remained and suffered. The mother suffered, and the wife and the child, and the musing comrades suffered. In our minds, the glassy blocks succumb over and over, slamming down floor by floor into themselves, blowing up as if in reverse, exploding downward and rolling outward, the way in the days of the gods a god might rage through the streets, overtaking the fleeing. As each tower goes down, it concentrates into itself, transforms itself infinitely slowly into a black hole, infinitesimally small, mass without space, where each light, each life put out lies down within us.